ladies and gentlemen, we are here for the April 2nd, 2024 board workshop. At this time, we do not have anyone signed up for public comment. Before we lead into our next item, I just want to thank everyone, including our trustees and everyone in this room for their commitment to several district initiatives and going-ons. We have, I believe today we will be on board bond presentation number 35, and we just appreciate everyone's commitment to helping inform the community about the May 4th bond election, with early voting starting on April 22nd through April 30th, with actual election day on Saturday, May 4th. We also have worked with the city to coordinate an eclipse to go right through the center of Georgetown. It looks like it is going to be cloudy and rainy that day. We will continue to track the weather. So the first item we want to work through, here's today's workshop, just to review the agenda. We're going to talk about balanced scorecard, teacher incentive allotment, district of innovation, and then also these kind of go hand in hand. Our compensation study and planning and budget workshop number 4. As we go into strategic direction, I just kind of want to set the stage for how we got here. So when I arrived in the school district, I had the opportunity to visit every single campus and multiple departments. And we essentially asked the question of what's going really well, what can be improved, and if you were in my shoes, what's the one thing that you would do? One of the themes that really emerged was the call for organizational clarity. So many things are strengths of this school district, but how can we provide clarity to the greatest degree possible? And I remember with the team I get to work with, I even, in my arrival in the school district, asked the question, there are so many great things happening here, but it seems like there's many different artifacts and documents in a couple different places. And I remember the team said to me, Fred used to say the same thing, and he used to say, I wish we could bring it all together. And so this is really, in terms of the balanced scorecard, an attempt to bring it all together. And what we are doing today is really working through it, a true workshop, where you get to ask questions and provide input. At the April board meeting, what we will ask you to do is adopt the performance objectives, the strategic objectives, which are on the very left column of this document, while we continue to work through the remainder of the document and make sure it's focused on the right things. A year from now, or less than a year from now, one of the aims is for this document to be a way where this board of trustees gets to hold your superintendent accountable. And then I get to use this document to hold myself accountable and to make sure our team is focused on the right work. And you will see many, if not all, of our strategic actions and strategic objectives are things we are either currently working on, or there is work taking place to launch these items throughout the remainder of this year and next year as well. So I want to, you were provided this document prior to the weekend, and several of you had the opportunity to give input on it. But Greg Gibson is here also. He has helped us kind of give us a framework for starting this work, and I just want to give you the opportunity to ask any questions and or provide any input that you might have. And Dr. Gibson, you might want to provide some more context if you want.
Good to see you all again, and as I appreciate the opportunity to drive in today, so I did have an opportunity to have coffee with my wife this morning in Graham, 3 hours and 30 minutes to the north here. Started to come last night. I'm glad I didn't. I would have been driving right into a squall line of storms, like literally. It clinched it last night when I looked at the. I'm on 281 and the storm line is right down 281. Newscasters are saying, do not get on Highway 281. I said, okay. So I had coffee this morning with my wife, and as usual, I got up and I made it, and she woke up and I gave her a cup of coffee. And so she said, you're going somewhere today, right? And I'm dressing like this, I'm not in ranch clothes, and it's like, yeah, I'm going somewhere, and she said, where are you going? I said, Georgetown, we're going to get lunch. And she said, I said, I'm gonna head out. And she said, I love you, just remember, nobody likes this stuff but you. You're the only one that really likes this, so she used, yeah, she invoked Winston Churchill, and I said, thank you, honey, and she said, be brief, be bright, be gone. Winston Churchill, at 7 a.m. or 6 a.m., this is good. But as Dr. Paddable stated, the concept of the balanced scorecard, just quick rewind, and I said this the first time, and then it's just interesting, I don't say that a lot about back to Norton and Kaplan, like at the origin. But you just touch on some things that validate, I think, why they initially developed the balanced scorecard. These are item number 2 on this simple working agenda. Don't look for it, but somewhere there's a working agenda, or it doesn't matter, it's just these guiding principles. So they were at Harvard Business School in the 1990s, and they were researching low-performing organizations' lack of strategic direction. And then someone had an idea of, let's research high-performing organizations. So Fortune 100, Fortune 500, and the interesting thing is they found the same problems in low-performing and high-performing. That there was lack of clarity between what is a strategic objective, which you mentioned earlier, the what we are trying to accomplish. So that there's lack of clarity about the objective itself. And then in the majority of the 1,000 or so organizations they studied, there was an almost universal confusion between a strategic action and a strategic objective. And so they just kind of get jumbled together. And I like to think about them, the objective is the what we are trying to accomplish, and the action is the how we're going to go about getting at that what. It makes so much sense, that I feel bad about saying it, but, with this organization, as Dr. Paddable said earlier, there were a lot of things, that were called objectives that, when you come in and you use this filter to look at it, it was pretty quick. The team's like, wait, that's an action. That's not the objective. That's not the what. That's the how. Truthfully, once we kind of got that construct straight in our head, I hate to say this because it took some time and it took some work, but it kind of started falling into place. I'm watching them smile back there because once we, what's the what and then what's the how, it started sorting out. So anyway, the document we're going to review today reflects a great amount of thinking and talking and collaborating, and I'm going to go back to thinking on this difference between the what we're trying to accomplish and the how. And I'm kind of pointing at Dr. Paddle and some of the team members back behind him primarily. The other thing that the research, the same study that at Harvard Business School, that there's lack of clarity, just like the difference between strategic objectives and strategic actions, there's lack of clarity of how we measure success along the way, and then how we measure success or not success at the end. And then what does the end mean? We have to have clarity about, does that mean annual, or does that mean annual towards a 5-year goal, or annual towards a 10-year goal? And I would say that some of this, I gave it a quick glance while I was driving on I-35. I looked at it last night briefly as the storm came through. But part of the work for the next year is this continual calibration of a lead measure and then a lagging measure. So the formula here is that an action rather, is an input. It's a really simple formula that runs all the way through this scorecard. So the action is the input. The output is checking to see if that input is working. Either 6 weeks, quarterly, 9 weeks, like, here's my fancy PhD definition of a lead measure. It's usually less than a year. It's some frequency, usually less than a year. So input is the action, or the action is input. The lead measure is the output. What can we look at numerically and/or through surveys, results to see if that input is being successful or not successful? And then the final measure is the outcome. Clarity about this outcome.
So, Greg, I think that I want to pause a little bit and just give the trustees just the opportunity to just instant first response. What are questions you have or any reflections you have about trying to bring some clarity to the balanced scorecard? I also want to give thanks to our middle school principals. They met with me for an afternoon and we worked through just language on this document because we had to fix some things that made the language. The original way we wrote it made it seem like there's work expected, additional work that's expected of the principal, and it's really important that at this level, this is a district leader accountability tool before we consider other things. And so a lot of revision took place because of their input.
And this is the district scorecard.
This is the district scorecard.
Which the campuses and departments eventually should be able to find a path. Mm-hmm. And that concept is called a cascaded scorecard. The best way to kill a scorecard is to cascade it at the start.
Yep.
Just to cascade at the start.
At the start. We do not cascade at the start. Let the universal one, the big one, mm-hmm. be the big one. Mm-hmm. Get into it, kick the tires up, mm-hmm. Then my experience, if you force cascading, then you'll fail at the district one and the campus one. That's my experience. If you build the big one correctly with a lot of input from principals, I think they're back here, so okay. Then, and you get good and tight about that, to me the cascading is just organic and naturally occurs. And I think that's the best way to do it. Just this is kind of like the long game. It's a short ball. Like you get this piece right, and that piece just naturally comes around.
So we have anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes for some discussion here before we talk about how do we actualize this.
And this has been a long work in progress. And on the very kind of theoretical and conceptual ideas, to borrow a term from Melanie Connor, squishy words. And we don't like squishy. We want to actually see some hard implementation, some action, so that you can give us feedback as to what. And so I'm excited to see how, and I know it's not an overnight solution product that we're going to come up with. It's going to be a work in progress. But I'm very optimistic to see that we're kind of getting there. We're moving away from squishy.
Yeah, squishy is, if I understand what you're talking about, and I think I do, is, in my opinion, is reserved for belief, mission, vision, and values. Okay, and you have to have those. Mm-hmm. And I think they're on the cover page. Like, there they are. Okay, so then it's how do we deliver on this cover page? So everything behind that should be non-squishy, to borrow your term, in my opinion. It should be, here's the objective, here's the action. Your team added a column that I'm sharing now as a best practice for those that are trying to get evidence. I don't know what it's called, what this looks like, when it's underway. That's a great, I love that. And just by the way, I'm sharing all this with some that are trying to give just good descriptors of what this looks like.
Yeah, I want to give credit to Wes Vanacek and Terry Conrad. They came up with process check and progress measure, which is an approach that none of us had considered before. So that really helped, and it speaks to ways of thinking that exist here in Georgetown ISD. So that was a great.
So you, like if someone's a squishy non-squishy purist, they might say the process check column is squishy. What I would argue is that you're framing up the professional conversations that need to be occurring with that process check column that will inform you to develop the progress check, which is generally to be more quantifiable. And we can point it, and we can put it in a pie graph, and there's too much red. You know, we got to get some of that red out.
What other reflections or feedback do you have for us? And every question is on the table, so you want to hear your input, because ultimately this is your accountability tool for me, and then our internal accountability tool for this people.
All I can say is I love it.
So, let me ask a question. I know that there was some work that was done on behavior, and there was an elementary cadre of people that met about some support systems or how that was, is that something, I'm on page number 3 of the document. Is that where some of this is coming in, some of the thinking and the work? It's under 2.1.
Oh, when I saw your voice trailing off like you were going to say something else. Lindsay, do you mind joining the table and you can speak to that if Lindsay's the best person?
Sure.
Yeah, we're going to do a live interview right here.
Okay, can't wait.
Yeah. So Lindsay, in 2.1, on strategic actions, we have language about emergent tree, MTSS, CKH. Do you believe that is honoring the work of that behavior design team, especially with our elementary principals?
I do. I think that not only will it give voice to current state and include a group and part of the research around the recommendations for next steps, they're going to want to do that in alignment to having an MTSS approach, using resources that we already engage with, like emergent tree and CKH. So we'll see all of that embedded, but ultimately that's probably a grain size lower. That action team is living out the work of those key strategic actions so that we'll get the results at the end, if that makes sense.
Okay, so can you define for me, or just a summary of what is emergent tree and what is MTSS?
Sure, they're both frameworks.
Okay.
MTSS harkens RTI, that idea that if we have a multi-tiered system of support, all students are getting some of those supports, other students are getting those supports, and a few more, and there are some students that are getting supports all along the way that nobody else is getting. So that's what we mean by multi-tiered system of supports. Emergent tree.
And how does that work with discipline? I mean, as far as behavior and discipline.
Same idea, like positive behavior support, activities, the idea that every campus and classroom has expectations, has things in place to reward and promote behavior, has clear processes for when the behavior isn't aligned to the expectations. Those kinds of things would all be considered tier 1 behavioral support. And if that's not serving a student or a classroom or a campus well, then tier 2 supports will be applied just to those students or classrooms where tier 1 isn't enough.
Lindsay answered that question perfectly, and if I could just summarize what she just said, addressing behavior is twofold, right? It's one, there's the response to behavior, but then there's also proactively equipping our staff with the tools and frameworks to just have that positive reinforcement, have some tools about how do I respond to the small behaviors before it's something that is disruptive to the learning environment or disruptive to that child being successful in school.
Dr. Hadley, if I might use this as a good example, so, yeah, don't leave here. because I may open the door for a follow-up question. So, as a trustee, and when you're together as a team of 8, you are the, if you remember the chart that had the 3 boxes the first time, you are the strategic role. Okay. So then the tactical role is all of these people. So that's the tactician. And so I looked over in the progress measure column and I see discipline data. So it's not explicit yet, but you're saying these are the data sources that we would go to. I'm going to give an example. I'm superintendent in Georgetown University City. We've got 1,200 teachers, and 15 or 16,000 kids, etc. So, and I'm technically the lead tactician, but in some ways in a district that size and larger, as a superintendent, you have to get real strategic, right? Lots of campuses, lots of moving parts. So I would ask questions like, how do we know, and I'm not going to read it, but like some strategy over here to the left, how do we know it's working? And then I'm listening, and like if it's anecdotal, these teachers at this campus are happy, and these teachers, that's not what I asked. I get that, by the way. I walk around and I get the anecdotes. What can we point to that says that it's working? Now, on this particular one, you have to almost intersect 2 data sets to me. You've got to intersect this, whatever you're going to tee up for discipline data. Then you go down to your priority on staff, and you have to intersect it with their survey on do we have the tools and resources we need to do the job. You see, that one is a really good example of you almost always have to look at 2 data sets to know the whole story. Because if we may be doing really well with discipline referrals, but if teachers in a survey are saying, I don't have enough tools to know, then you have to look at both of those data sets and then just try to find your equilibrium. And it's just kind of push a little, what's like push once, pull 5 times. Push once, pull 5 times. I mean, that's generally what I try to keep in my head.
Well, this is an unplanned conversation, but what I appreciate about what you're saying is it is really easy to us to be reactive to constant anecdotes from the organization as opposed to, honestly, the board is entitled to us reporting on clear data sets that tell us organization-wide how it's really going, so that we are making on-the-fly adjustments if it's not working.
I always made note of anecdotes, but what I was trying to do from the board, I made notes, because then when we were in our system of listening and focus grouping and working with staff, I was checking back against those anecdotes to just see if it could be validated or invalidated, right? And that's a little different, and this is the long game. Now is that long game starting to make sense? Dr. Paddle just touched on something. If we do this right, and the conclusion of this, I want to kind of talk about the next step. If we do this right, in the next 4 years, the board should feel like you're getting these lead measures regularly. So that the conversation is not just, what are y'all hearing? It's, tonight we're talking about 2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3. And we're going to share some data and we're going to listen to see what you're hearing. Next month it's 1.1 and 1.2, right? So you build this pattern of this back and forth, if you will, between the strategic role and the tactical role. And what we're seeking there is harmony and synchronicity. So the board, I can tell you on the TRS board, I think I shared that example with you, on the teacher retirement system board. I've just said, if you don't want me in the weeds, I need to know at a high level what's going on in the weeds. Don't just shut me out. Let me know how it's going in the weeds. Does that make sense?
Hey, what's the significance of the whole? That's the stuff you pulled from.
Oh, good question. So the bolded items, I probably should have covered this. The strategic direction work that the district led through last year, what we wanted to do is honor all of the priority objectives that were created by the community. So anything in bold is a priority objective that was defined as either a strategic objective, a strategic action, a progress measure, a process check, or a long-term outcome. So, well, what where we were at the start of the year was, it was all listed on the strategic direction document. But how do we make sure it's honored over the course of X number of years? And so all of those priority objectives exist on this document.
And I would note with a quick glance, now where the team feels like they fit, right? One's a measure, one's an action, one is an objective. I know it felt like pulling teeth, but I don't think there was that much trouble with finding where those fit. Was there once we kind of got the, I think it kind of, in fact, we all was on Zoom and they said, go away to me. And I was like, goodbye, and then I get this, and then they work for 5 hours and I get a draft back. It's like, oh, now I know why they wanted me to go away. Like once it clicks, it's like, these things fit.
What's the purpose of building on a 4-year cycle? Like you're talking 4 years, most of these dates are 4 years out.
Yeah, so strategic plans in the last 20 years have gone from 20 years to 10 years to 5 to 4. And it's just, I think why it's landing on 4, that's a great question. Why it's landing on 4 is things change so fast that it doesn't make sense to design beyond that. But it takes 3 years of data to build a trend. And so, does that make sense? So at least we've got like a true north, like the compass stays in the same direction for at least a full set of trend lines.
The majority of it seems to be 4 years out, those cases.
And that's the long-term outcomes. The progress measures are clearly much shorter. So I'm envisioning that the progress measure is kind of an ongoing thing that then circles back to the process check. Because if we're not meeting those measures, then let's go see why we're not and adjusting the process.
In the middle of the
year. Did we
year.
get the outcome we wanted? And so that's kind of.
I'm not adding to that. That was well said. That was a good question, and that's
And
perfect.
so we'll get into probably implementation, like establishing baseline where we're at now, creating that into the board so we can see what the gaps and what resources we're missing to allow them to actually pull this off.
That's correct. That, to me, that kind of like that's the work of the next year. Like you mentioned, I said that once there's clarity that these are the objectives, and the board adopts those objectives, then the team starts doing everything you're saying. Like, okay, now we're aligning everything to the right of the objectives for the next year. Could be squishy. It could be
Squishy.
Yeah, it could be squishy, but it shouldn't take more than a year for that to be less squishy. But they need to know board adoption first, and then that's a big signal. Yep, those are the objectives. Board adopted. Okay, now we're going back and making sure this stuff lines up. And I want to be real clear. Not everything can wind up in the scorecard. Norton and Kaplan and Greg McCowan had a baby, and it's our scorecard. Okay, Greg McCowan is essentialism. Do 10 things 100% rather than 100 things 10%. So everything cannot wind up in it. That was part of probably the biggest struggle. Just because something is not in the scorecard, even in this next year, if it tightens up and crystallizes a little bit, it doesn't mean that the other work is not important. It just means it's not as important as these.
Everything can be a priority.
That's right. Well, I mean, it can, but it's basically nothing. Yeah. Peter Singh, if everything matters in an organization, then nothing matters.
And I want to draw a quote from the middle school principals when I got some time with them. A lot of these long-term outcomes are the delicate balance between attainable and ambitious, right? And so because this team helped put together strategic direction, they really launched a lot of relatively new-ish change engine work. This will be a baseline here, so we will have to come back together at some point and say, are these long-term outcomes on the mark? Or do we adjust this based upon what we saw this year?
I think it's a good year for that with accountability system finally for law and hopefully, I'm not on every, yeah. But I mean, this is some more measures and other measures, and I think we're about to finally know what they are, or we can at least know what that is.
Then I have a question. Have teachers seen this at all? No, some teachers have not seen this. So one of the things that you did, which I felt was a strength of yours during the rezoning, was you had a phrase, and I heard you say it several times when I went to see you speak, which is, this isn't something that we're doing to you, this is something that we're working together. It needs to be done, and we're working together. And I know a ton of thought has gone into this. I just want to, I'm curious, all the way down to the implementation level, who are going to be the teachers, is there a space built in for them to see this, react, give feedback, point out glaring omissions that echelons above reality have missed, which is us sitting around tables?
Yeah, we've talked about that. Informing the rest of the organization is like that final step.
But they informed this document, that's the whole that I have.
That is correct.
Like,
Yeah,
you
they
were
were
good for
part of
that
it.
piece of it, but we had focus groups that were teachers, community members, parents,
Sure.
angry old people that live on the edge of town and don't want to pay tax, whatever it was, there was a group that came in, and all of these bolded ideas is that voice that's in this document.
Yeah.
And that's what I was asking earlier, what the
So,
significance of it was,
some
because
of-
you see that through here.
Okay.
This document exists to provide a sense of clarity at the district leader level. And then by cascading, it becomes something the principal sets a direction to as they see the direction set by the district. A missed opportunity for us at the beginning of the year, we talked about this, is when the power went out at convocation, we missed the opportunity to really market and talk about strategic priority areas, right? And so after we get to almost fully baked here, we really have to think as a district about how do we communicate, market / inspire and empower others to really understand this is who we are, this is what we're about, and here's how we're going about the work. Like that's that almost final level of work that'll be necessary of us. It's one thing to put a PDF on the website, it's another thing to help teach others.
I think to Anthony's point, though, this wasn't done in a bubble. It's not being done to the organization. This started from the work we did with the community.
That's correct.
And is developed into the.
But I also, I see what
Like, is
you're
that your
doing.
concern, is that we missed that step?
I just was asking about how, if it was considered, like, a little clarity on how all this information was put together, because like I said, I keep going back to that statement that you made, which disarmed the community so much when they came, some people came in a little with their guard up. And you reinforced to them, like, this isn't something that we're doing to you, and it created buy-in. And so I was just seeking to understand how the teachers are.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and let me see if I'm, this may be an assumption, we don't know we know what happens when a person assumes. But because this is gonna be ongoing, like as you're collecting those progress measures from teachers, principals and teachers are gonna implement this. And then they're gonna collect information, they're gonna push it back up, and then we're either gonna take that information and say, hey, we need to recheck our processes because we're not getting the
And you're
measures,
you're
what-
only adopting the objectives.
Right.
So
And
all of that-
all of that is going to be going on.
That's right.
That's the sausage getting made in the kitchen
That's
that we're
correct.
trusting y'all to do, because teachers are gonna tell you, hey, you asked to measure this, this progress, but that's useless information. How about you measure this instead? Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is just an emerging thought right now. In the event, in the course of this next year, that through teacher groups or staff groups, you think that one of the objectives needs to be reworded, then what I would say to the board is, then I'm looking at his nod, y'all are saying, bring that
Yeah.
concept. Because all you're adopting is this cover page and column 1. Right, that's all, and then everything else is the sausage being made. That's exactly right.
And I fully recognize that this wasn't something that came out of nowhere. You started by talking about the lack of clarity around the strategic objectives being something that the district itself felt like that's an issue. And this is our effort to solve it.
Yes, sir.
So I appreciate that and recognize that.
from your experience of using this kind of a document and this kind of a scorecard, and looking at the long-term objectives, even though it looks like we're focusing, which we are, we're focusing in on as far as the measure is reading, it would seem like that, and we're talking about a 4-year span, it would seem like the lessons that you are learning, you know, as a group, teachers, staff, whatever, the lessons that you are learning and seeing the progress that you're making would play into the other subject areas. Let's say that you come up once and it's writing that's tanked. That if you're getting this result over here, that would apply in that area also, which I think, is that what you see in doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. The board adopts the belief, mission, and vision. I know that sounds simple, but the 2 districts that I was at 12 years and 8 years, when I arrived, were running 25 independent school districts. All the campuses and all the departments were running completely independent of each other. Okay, so don't look past the simplicity if it's just one mission. Like the district is just one mission. So then the board will adopt column 1. I like to think of it this way. The board adopts column 1 after this discussion, and then they really perseverate on column 5. Is this the right outcome? And when I strategic, tactical, operational, that's an appropriate strategic level question. Should it rise and be? That's an appropriate conversation for this team, your tactical leaders and the board. So I mean, for me to give an answer to it right now, I think would be inappropriate, but I think it's the right question for the board to ask.
Right.
And then everything in between is kind of like the sausage being made that y'all are just getting periodic updates. But that outcome measure, the board should be paying attention to that, in my opinion.
Do we adopt the outcomes to
Okay,
match
very,
the objectives?
next thing on my mouth. I mean, like perfect timing. I asked the board in SEUC to adopt the outcome column about a year after initial implementation.
To
Because
give them a chance to see if
Test
that was a
it,
fair
correct.
way of measuring.
That's exactly right. We gave updates to the board feedback, and then that adoption of the outcomes kind of just raised the awareness, like we're locking, it's almost like locking, I live out in the country, so lockdown metaphors, I apologize, but we're locked and loaded, you know, like at that point.
I have one thing. I really like what you said about the balanced scorecard and picking certain areas to showcase at board meetings.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I hear about that from my Central Texas School Board colleagues and leadership colleagues, that they literally will take something out of this and go, okay, we're going to do 1, A, B, and C. And it becomes part of a board meeting, not a workshop.
That is the intent, ma'am, is that we set up a cadence where we're at least reporting out on process check, progress measures, that a way where you're not waiting until February and then end of the year, where there's regular small bite-sized updates that lead up to that, and you're able to provide input and ask questions on that.
If we do it right, that communication out to you all can say, we're going to do a 2-hour workshop. I'm not saying we're going to do a 2-hour workshop.
Yeah.
We're going to do a 2-hour workshop on 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And that means something to you all.
Mhm.
So you know we're going to take that slice and we're going to dig in. And most districts front load workshops, just FYI, as it first emerges, then they get in year 2, year 3, year 4 into monthly board. You know what I'm saying? Like it's almost like I'm going to need a little more time to really understand. Then we can move that to a monthly check-in, because I know what all those measures mean.
Right.
Those process checks and those progress.
Trustees and Greg, before we transition into the last part of this systems check, I just want to reiterate, so had the opportunity to work with principals last week, our middle school principals, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I feel like we reworded or reworked all of 1.1 based upon their feedback. And principals don't know this yet, but on Thursday at Download, We're going to give them the opportunity to provide more feedback. And, what's most important to just Deb and the superintendent is that everyone feels like they have clarity, and principals don't feel like I am pursuing a million things as opposed to what is the most important thing, what are the most important things being prioritized by the school district. And so just that feedback is, we want to be focusing on the right stuff, and so we're going to continue to have that kind of cycle of feedback and revisions on everything outside of what the board approves.
That tees up the systems check really well.
Right.
We're going to do that.
All yours.
I mean,
You have a document that looks like this?
is that a line arrows?
It is.
Handy.
Yeah.
Is it in your packet? Sorry.
You have two documents that look like this. You have the arrows, and then you have the system.
Oh, it's on the back. I got it.
Oh, it's on the back.
All right, so the aligned arrows and then the systems check. And Dr. Paddable just said, and if y'all remember the aligned arrows from the first time I was here, and we want to move from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4, obviously, and I think we even read those descriptions. I personally believe that once the scorecard is adopted, if you look at the definition of stage 1, you're out of stage 1. Like that's the low hanging fruit. Does that make sense? Like you almost cannot be in stage 1 if you have a board adopted scorecard. So you're in 2. That's the good news. The bad news is there's nothing else will be that easy for the rest of this journey. Like from 2 to 4 is like, that's the small ball, just year after year after year. Dr. Paddable a moment ago said, a million things. I am not saying on the systems check that these are the correct 30 things, but we've vetted this with 20 to 30 existing and retired superintendents. And we were trying, it was a simple question, what do school boards and school superintendents need to keep their eye on? That was the question. And we have settled on these 30 things. You will see these, and by the way, I think it's number 11. Yeah, look at number 11, process number 11. You all own that one. You see, you get to own one of them, so it's only 29 for the tactician. Because you all took a good governance inventory, so the question here is, do we have a systematic process for, systematic, is it well-defined, repeatable, and provable? That systematic process means it happens on a recurring basis. So see, the challenge back to you on number 11, trustees, is do you have a systematic process for ensuring good governance? Y'all know that one of your custodians was wiping down all the yellow stuff off the windowsills out there. I think it all landed in the background. No, she was making it look beautiful. The other 29, the first 10 or 11 are very broad. One of which, I'm not going to read to you, but one of them we talked about a while ago. We have more than enough data in Georgetown High State. I don't even know how much data you have. I'm going to make a guess that it's too much. Because every organization has too much data. What we don't have is knowledge being drawn from said data. So, do you have a systematic process for translating data into knowledge? That's working out that column 4. That's what, so that your systematic process is the work you're doing on column 4. I would argue that these arrows, you may be thinking like those are departments, or those are people, or those are campuses. I would argue possibly that those arrows are these 30 things. You've got to get these 30 things from stage 1 to stage 4 for the district to be stage 4. You can't just all of a sudden one day say, we're stage 4. By the way, in my retirement, they gave me a t-shirt that said, we are underlined stage 4. 12 years of work, right? I was like, there's some pockets of it. Like that was literally probably one of the best thing I should have said on my way out the door. I think we had pockets of 4 in 12 years. I don't think we had all 30 at stage 4.
So it gives us something to aspire to.
This, I think like this is the, and so what I don't know that the board necessarily ever needs to, see this, hear about this. This is meant to be a tool for the administration to constantly probe how are we doing on systematic processes for these 30 components. Now you want to read it. Right?
Yes, yes.
And I mean, all this. This is all allergy too, so. I'll just leave it out there, Dr. Patterson. I guess the 30, the systems check as we call it, that's the framework. The scorecard is the tool. If you want to think about framework versus tool. The scorecard feels a little bit like a framework. It's not. It's really the performance tool to deliver on the framework. 30 feels like a lot, but in the absence of clarity of 30, it probably feels like 300 on any given day, right? Or 3,000. How many balls can we hold up in the air? Plates can we spin? The 30 is meant to allow administrators and board members to kind of anchor back to, we need to get these 30 things right. These are the highest leverage things. If you pull that lever, 10 levers get pulled. If that makes sense. I think that it gives some clarity to that team also when you're designing actions. That's the purpose. That's why we originally created that, because tactical teams were saying, give us good examples of aspirational strategic actions. Well, there's a list to start with. I hate to throw a framework down on the table and then lead you to budget workshops. Districts of innovation.
Yeah. It's good though, right? Trustees, do you have any other questions or charges for us as we move forward? All right. Greg, appreciate it. Enjoy your drive back to Grand Texas.
Thank you all so much. Thanks.
Where you stop at Buc-ee's?
Yeah, I'll over to Buc-ee's in about 15 minutes. Thank you so much.
Where's Graham?
3.5 hours of New York here.
Okay.
About 50 miles west of Fort Worth. Thanks,
Trustees, we're going to honor the time and move forward. I have Amanda Johnson and Wes Vandercheck. We're going to talk about teacher incentive allotment. Wait, or are we doing DOI first?
TIA first and then DOI. All right, so you've heard us mention the teacher incentive allotment over the last couple of months. I've shared that in the district improvement plan update. So just kind of want to do a high-level overview of what we've been up to, what it is, and kind of what we're doing with regards to the teacher incentive allotment. You've probably heard about it in your going-ons as a school board member just across the state as well. So kind of a little bit of what is the teacher incentive allotment. This is a funding mechanism that the state put forward in 2019 with House Bill 3 to try to incentivize and reward quality teaching and student growth when kind of bringing those two metrics together. Districts essentially will create a local designation system, and the 3 levels of designation are recognized, exemplary, and master. Each of those come with it a different dollar amount award. It does prioritize hard-to-staff positions, and this is kind of TEA's intent. School districts or school campuses that have a lower income student demographic profile or are a rural campus, which we don't have any rural campuses, FYI. We used to, but no longer. We're squarely suburban now.
What used to be considered
It
rural?
was actually Ford Elementary.
Oh, back when Willie was the 2-lane road.
Yeah.
I remember those days.
Yep. But we're squarely no longer rural anymore. But those campuses that have a lower income demographic profile have a kind of a bump in the pay funding. So one school that is kind of a higher SES, a higher rate of SES would pay out higher than a school with lower SES. It is focused on teacher funding, so 90% of the funds that a designated teacher generates goes back to the campus of that teacher. In Georgetown, those funds go back to the teacher. And then finally, there's a 5-year validity. So this is important because it has to do with kind of why our plan is being shaped the way that it is. But a teacher, once they're designated, they retain that designation for up to 5 years. They are eligible to, bump up. So if they get a recognized level, just kind of the first level, they can badge up, if you will, to exemplary or to master, and then they would retain that recognition for 5 years, even if they leave GISD. So that's why we want to build a plan that would incentivize our designated teachers to stay in GISD as opposed to get a designation and then go somewhere else. Question?
Where does the money come from?
Texas Education Agency.
Okay.
Yeah. So this was it's simply it's a legislative funded source. All right. So a little bit about our designation system. Like I mentioned, it ties together teacher performance. In Georgetown, that's T-test. You may have heard about that. That's our appraisal system. That's our standard appraisal system. That's what we'll use for the teacher performance aspect of it. And then student growth measures, this is where it starts to kind of drill down a little bit depending on the grade level or the subject area. So it is looking at the percent of students meeting or exceeding growth expectations. And essentially that's a pre-test, post-test. So where do they start in the beginning of the school year? Where do they end? And what percent of students met the expected growth for 4th grade reading language arts, for example. Each one of those comes in to create the local designation system. As I mentioned, the recognized, exemplary, and master. There are the dollar amounts on the screen there. The range, like I said, I'd say recognized, 3,000 to 9,000. The only thing that changes that is the campus that you teach based on the demographic profile. So it's not a performance range that you're middle of the road recognized, so you got 6. It's all about where you teach as opposed to kind of it's not a sliding scale metric for performance.
Question.
Yes.
So on the student growth measures, so that one takes into account that if you're working in a high needs campus, and because you're looking at growth, that could be, a really great fact. I mean, the fact that it's equalizes
That's
things
right.
up to a certain extent rather than.
That's right. It's about growth, not achievement.
Not achievement.
Yeah, that's been a lot of the conversation that we've had with our different stakeholder meetings, that it's, well, I have a class that just happens to be low for whatever reason or high based on performance. This is about growth. So where do they start, where do they end, as opposed to where are they at one point in time.
And these numbers represent the yearly, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep, that's a year's worth of data and then a year's worth of financial reward.
Right. Directly to the teacher.
That's right.
Recapture.
90% to the teacher.
Okay.
Recapture the recapture.
That's right. We're recapturing some of the recapture. You can think of it that way. That's right.
And then Wes, I'm sorry, not to go back a slide.
No, it's okay.
You spoke about the 5-year validity.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So
that financial compensation would last for those 5 years?
that's right. And
Every year?
unless a teacher moves out of an eligible assignment. So if a teacher becomes an assistant principal or something like that, they can forfeit the allotment.
Right.
That's right.
And that 5 years is no longer tied to continued scores, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, if a teacher comes in
Unless
at
they
a
go up,
recognized
But
level,
you can't go back now.
you resubmit the data to get to the exemplary level. That's right.
Great, thank you.
And I will share, in the conversations that we've had with different stakeholders, we have a lot of teacher input, a lot of teacher conversation to just start to wrap our heads around this. And there's been an internal struggle of, okay, well, what does it mean to incentivize, standardized test scores essentially, because that's essentially what these are. What does it mean to incentivize, for me to get an award and Amanda's my team teacher and maybe she didn't this year and that kind of thing. And so it's definitely been a kind of a tussle. Where we've landed is, we know that having a quality teacher in the classroom is the most important thing we can do for our kids' education. And so this opportunity is a recruitment and a retention tool. With TIA becoming more common in Central Texas and just in Texas in general, we want to make sure that we're maintaining a competitive advantage in the workforce. If a teacher comes to us and gets designated, we want them to stay with us. Likewise, if a teacher comes to us with a designation, we want to be able to pay them for their designation. And we don't want a teacher to leave us to go get designated and get funds
Who
somewhere else.
chooses the designation?
So
Who gives them that?
the data does technically.
I know, but who's assigning it? It's not us, it's the state.
No, it's the state, that's right. It's a system that we'll build, and then we submit it. This is all actually
And
kind
the
of vetted
state
through
tells
Texas
us
Tech.
if they're recognized as good or not.
That's correct.
And is there a cap on the number of teachers across the state that can be each of those things?
There's not a cap, but that bottom statement is pretty important because there's not a cap on total number of teachers or total number of payouts. However, there are kind of statewide standard performance metrics that about the top 33% is in the recognized category, the top 15 to 20 is in the exemplary, and then mastery is about the top 5%. And so our system has to make kind of statistical sense to Texas Tech and to TEA. Texas Tech is a university that they're partnering with to do kind of all the data validation. So if we were to build a system that recognized 90% of our staff,
Yeah.
we wouldn't be accepted. So we can expect that, you know, around the 30 to 35, or the top 30 to 35% of data to be recognized in our system.
And how many districts across the state are already doing this?
Oh goodness, there are several hundred districts across the state that are already either in an acceptance position but not paying out yet.
So they haven't started paying out yet?
There are several that have, and around us that are paying out right now. Pflugerville is paying out, Temple and Killeen is paying out, Llano, Blanco, Lockhart, and Hayes. So it just kind of did this, and that's the rural aspect, that's the rural bump, right? You kind of say you see it, but it's starting to come back in, you know, kind of more along 35 corridor. I suspect that more of our neighbors are kind of right where we are with regards to the timing of implementation.
And you're working with them to make sure that our teachers know how to do the application well? 'Cause-
So we do the application, the teachers don't have to do the application.
Oh, y'all do it.
The teachers teach, do great teaching and ensure
You just
students
report
learn.
that
That's
information?
correct.
Okay.
Consolidate all the, and then are you giving the top 35, or I heard the number 35%. Are we submitting the top 35% or whatever the percent is?
So we'll submit our data and then we'll submit the teachers for designation and the state will thumbs up and then submit the funds, or they will for some reason say no and they'll explain to us why not.
Is it truly objective or is there some subjectivity to it?
I don't know if that can be an answer for us.
So Wes has done a really good job of facilitating these groups and giving input. He's also done a real good job of talking to other school districts that are a year or two ahead of us and saying, hey, what does the analogy use? Rabbit holes? Yeah, what are the rabbit holes that we can anticipate? And so there are some, the T-tests, teacher performance. There's going to be a need for just high alignment and calibration to make sure that there's no subjectivity there. There are going to be things for our campus leaders to work through in terms of making sure a culture of collaboration is maintained,
Yes.
even though it can feel like, how is this going to affect potentially my payout or my peers' payout at the end of the year? And you know, we just, Wes spoke to it, but you know, there's this internal struggle of, is using a universal screener like MAPS or STAR or M-Class, is that really something we want to put all of our eggs in that basket? And at the same time, is it right for us to leave, for lack of better analogies, money on the table that could go to our staff? And you know, he also brought up the example of if there's a TIA teacher in another district who's considering coming to Georgetown, if they know that they won't get their payout here, that's a hurdle towards them applying for a position.
The subjective nature of it is going to be a kind of a big hill to climb for us, but arguably a good hill to climb for us, right? The more aligned we are in terms of providing quality feedback to our teachers to become better practitioners, that's a win-win. You know, certainly not an easy task.
I mean, because I'm excited, but I also want to, manage expectations and be
Sure.
realistic.
And we will maintain the policy policies that we currently have on the books with regards to if a staff member wants to request an additional appraisal or second appraisal, all of those same policies that are in place now will continue to as well. So just a few more points on TIA. We have a stakeholder committee right now. It's all teachers, principals, there's a few of us from central office that are there as well that just speak to the different kind of department levels that are involved. We've met for about 5 hours total over a couple of meetings and had all kinds of discussion and conversation, as I'm sure you can imagine. We also met with, we utilize DPC just as a standing committee of stakeholders across the community and the district to provide some input, and also visited with the teacher advisory committee just trying to get as much input from as many teachers as possible. Most of the feedback is very similar in nature. So the application, it is a multi-year, multi-step process. So we're in application month right now. We'll submit an application in April, and then we'll find out sometime May to June if we're accepted or not, or if we need to make some tweaks, and then final acceptance of our application is later in the summer. Then we'll go through a data validation process. We'll then go through a data collection process, and our first payouts won't be until summer of 26 at the earliest. So we've got a bit of a lead time. And so most of that is looking at data validation and looking at skew. Is there a major skew in your data? Is there a correlation between student learning outcomes and T-test appraisals? I think we talked about this last bullet point. We're just talking about student growth. The reasons that we're landing on these is we have been everything but told to do it this way, essentially. We're looking for a successful application. And right now, TIA is kind of the land of opportunity. There's a million different ways that you can do it, but there's really only a few ways to do it successful in the beginning. And that is to start small with your kind of your net of eligibility and start with student growth measures that you already have in place. So there are all kinds of ways to measure student growth, but if we're not currently using them and have valid and reliable data at a system level, and they say, sure, build that for the future, don't put that in your application year. So that's where we're looking at math in class and as well as STAR. And STAR for the grade levels where we have a second year of STAR data. So think of 4th grade reading language arts. There's a 3rd grade and then a 4th grade. We can use that as an additional data point. Basically, we'll take the higher of the two. And so, for example, if in-class data for some reason is low in a particular class, but the STAR data is high, that's okay. We'll use the STAR data then. So, trying to kind of backstop from too many moments where there's just one data point, but also balance the stakes that are applied to the assessment sometimes. Finally, our plan is to add additional grade levels and subject areas. So as we get full approval, we'll continue to widen our data eligibility with the hopes of having all of our teachers eligible at some point in time down the road for this incentive. And the next steps is informational sessions to discuss our plan. We'll submit our application on the 15th. We'll continue, we're building a TIA handbook, which is going to be kind of our Bible of TIA, all things, everything, kind of all the decision points and why they were made a certain way. We'll also have a website. And then we'll begin preparing for data validation this summer and into the early part of fall. So that we've got a better idea of what our data looks like before we submit it to TEA and Texas Tech. And then do that on the human resources side of things. Yes, ma'am.
So our teachers who do more of the intervention, they're not eligible for this?
So right now, we expect that they will be. SPED, resource and inclusion teachers, dyslexia intervention. If we have, this is an if because we're exploring it with the consultant that we're working with. The possibility is there. The question is, are we going to be able to do it in the first year or not? Because we'll use, for those, we'll use the same gen ed data that they're contributing to. It's just going to be a matter of, is the system tight enough right now to use it in application year 1, or is that something that we loop into year 2?
Thank you for looking at that.
You bet. No, a huge topic of discussion, as you can expect. That's right.
All right, thank you, Wes. We're going to push forward into district innovation.
There we go. All right, so shared a little bit of this information with you previously in the update, and this is something that we're looking forward to bringing to you at the April regular meeting. So our district innovation plan has a couple of revisions, two which are necessary, one which is kind of added flexibility for the district. So the first two are deletions, and those are because at the time the exemption was necessary to access the allowance, state law has now changed to where those are no longer necessary. The first one is the group health benefits. We exercised our flexibility on that when we pursued it. The law's changed. It doesn't change any practice for us. It just is basically a moot point in our DOI plan needs to be removed. And the same thing for the excused absences. We were pursuing some additional flexibility. There were some recent law changes, and now we have optional flexibility already built into the current statute. So those two are literally just straight up deletion from our plan, but it falls under the same guise as an amendment, so it requires approval. Any questions on those two? These are just quick changes. The one that is actually a change to our DOI plan and actually adds some flexibility or changes or adjusts some practice is the one around teacher certification. So we're pursuing added flexibility for hiring candidates for teaching positions that have a bachelor's degree but maybe they're not fully certified yet. Right now there are some ways to go about that, but it's incredibly cumbersome and loophole, and it doesn't provide a very clear path to certification for the candidate. So we want to pursue added flexibility for that, for the obvious reason of hiring quality candidates in a very difficult time to find quality candidates. We also want to pursue added flexibility so we can partner with Indiana Wesleyan University to create a Grow Your Own program where staff who don't have a bachelor's degree can obtain a bachelor's degree and become fully certified in Texas, all while teaching and serving in Georgetown ISD. These two pieces kind of bring us in line with our neighbors in terms of kind of hiring flexibility. So our neighbors are able to access candidates that we're not able to. And so kind of getting in line there, kind of brings that competitive advantage back to us. And then there are some exceptions that are already built into law that we can't act on, and that's for prepaid, special education, and bilingual. So those would be areas that are kind of off limits with regards to DOI.
Okay, go back to the very last one, because of course that's where the high needs are, the
Sure.
special ed and the bilingual. So talk a little bit more about that, what you just said.
So the why is those are federally funded programs, and DOI is a state level kind of allowance for school districts to opt out of state laws. And so with those being federal programs, we can't mess with the feds, essentially.
So in other words, if you have a special education aide, she would not be eligible in order to go to this Indiana Wesleyan University, and
She could, but it just wouldn't be in the area of special education bilingual or
unfortunate. Yeah. Okay.
But once she gets her degree, then she can get the
Yes,
endorsement.
you go back.
Tag on that
Right.
certification, that's right.
Got it, yeah. But even bilingual, I mean,
I know.
okay.
This was a conversation we brought to our DPC last week, and Amanda and Leslie shared some really good information just as to the number of vacancies that we have currently, that, compared to where we were several years ago, where we hope to be moving forward, and how this is it may not solve all of our hiring problems, but if it takes a big bite out of it, that's a win for us. The DPC, they did approve it. I think we had one or two holdouts, but there was over 22 of the 28 were approvals for the changes.
I'm excited about the potential for some of our staff that are paraprofessionals that have gotten arguably some of the best on-the-job training, who are equipped to serve well in the classroom, and then also through Georgetown ISD and the Grow Your Own program, our HR department is putting together, have the opportunity to finally realize their goal of getting their bachelor's degree.
Okay, great.
Next steps with the DOI amendment is to bring this back for consideration and action at the April 15th board meeting.
Thank you, Wes.
Are
Madam
we
President,
on time? Do we want to take a quick break?
I was going to ask, would you like a 5-minute break?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 12:20. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back after a short break into our board workshop. Miss Amy Campbell is here to give us an update on district pay systems here at Georgetown ISD.
Hi, I'm Amy Campbell, Director of HR Services at TASC. And while I was back there waiting, I was looking at my records to see when the last time I presented to the board was here, and it was 2014. And it does not seem like it was that long ago. Mostly it was my team that has come since then, but I'm glad to be back. So I have a lot of information about compensation to share, and it's a lot of numbers. So please do stop and ask questions along the way. I'd rather it be a conversation than me talking at you and just a bunch of numbers. So a few things to remember as we talk about compensation. We've got teacher structures, which are very rigid and aligned by years of experience and educational attainment. And for other jobs, we have squishy. I love that word, I say it all the time. I find others do. It's a little bit squishier in that we've got people aligned within a pay range. And so we've got a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum for each pay range. And people are distributed within the range based on their values, how they are valued by the district, like their years of experience, their educational credentials, certifications and such, but it's not as visually rigid as the teacher pay structures are. Now the midpoints, you're going to see an image in just a moment that I hope looks better on the slide than the printed version. Thanks. We are not a Google, TASC's not Google, so the images didn't quite down. But the midpoint here, the middle line in each pay range, should align with market value for the jobs within each grade. And so when we talk about market value, that's the median or middle value of all data reported for any particular job. And so we're shooting for that market target, but we know that not everyone is going to be exactly at that rate. People come with a range of different values as they bring us to the job. And so if I'm totally new to my job and I'm learning and developing, it's expected that I'm going to be below that market rate. But over time, as I develop and become fully trained and fully functional, I will move closer to that market rate. Ideally, a little faster than districts are able to get there, but you're very much aligned with all of your neighbors and peers in terms of how you go about that process. And then as I am growing and developing and staying in my job and staying with the district for quite some time, I expect to move beyond that market rate at some point in the future. And the other thing to keep in mind is that this target moves every year too. As your provider pay increases, you have to adjust your minimum rates to be competitive, and your maximum rates need to move so that people don't top out or hit that ceiling too soon.
And as we're crafting our budget, you're using what when you're forecasting? Actuals from the prior year, or are you using midpoints spread across all of it?
Actually, from the prior year with the recommended increase at the midpoint.
Okay, and then new teachers are just factored in, or new positions for new schools or whatever, right at that midpoint?
For teachers, we typically use 60,000,
Okay.
which includes benefits.
Yeah, the numbers I'm going to give you for cost estimates are without fringe benefits, and so Jennifer works for magic for those numbers after. So this is your tier district list that has been in place for several years now. It looks no different than prior year, other than the two little asterisks for Liberty Hill. They had some staff changes this year, and so did not complete their survey on time. We captured their teacher data, and so the asterisk is just to say, yes, we've got their teacher data there, but salaries for their other jobs are not reflected in the market comparison. But because we're using the median, one missing or one added doesn't really skew the number significantly. Also to note, because so many of your peers are differently sized than you, we've got quite a few that are smaller and quite a few that are larger. For central administration positions, we also looked both at your local market, but also at statewide districts with similar size so that we could get an apples-to-apples match. It's important, I know the district has focused on local districts for central admin, but we wanted to show both so that you have some points of comparison there. We also one thing we bring to our projects that, I know I worked in compensation in a local school district too, that I didn't have access to, and it's great to have now, is private sector data. We purchase non-school, and we say private sector, we'll call it non-school market data, because it also reflects other public sector employers like Williamson County and City of Austin and governmental employers, as well as private sector, for those jobs that exist also outside of K-12. And so you'll have that data from Economic Research Institute and comp analysts factored in for your tech jobs and custodians and accountants and jobs that exist outside of K-12. So I realize those numbers are tiny, but hopefully the pie slices and you've got to communicate. We always look at demographic information for teachers, and I try to think of it as the canary in the coal mine, but also as just a good reflection of how you're growing and how your teacher population is changing in every district. In most districts, about half of your teaching population will have 10 or fewer years of experience, and about half above that. And that's true for you as well. You've got 54% of your teachers with fewer than 10 years. And as you grow, many of your fast growth neighbors have increased the population of teachers with less experience. Yours have increased just a hair, just 2% more over last year. But nothing to be concerned about. This is very typical, very normal for districts of your size and location. What I would say is you just want to, again, no action needed on this, just be aware that you also have 80% of your teachers with significant experience who could be considering retirement. And so as you lose those experienced teachers, you'll just want to be have a pay structure that helps you hire the teachers that you want to poach from other districts, experienced and trained teachers. There's nothing wrong with hiring totally green newbies as well. It's helpful to HR and to CNI and others to have a distributed experience demographic of new hires so that you're not needing to dedicate so much time and energy to training every single teacher. So it's nice to be able to hire who you want to take away.
Amy, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you go back to one quick second?
Yeah, of course.
You referenced the canary in the coal mine.
Oh yeah, sorry, the canary in the coal mine is if you start, yeah, that's good, sorry, thank you for bringing me back to my statement. So if you notice over time that the teacher experience demographics look different than you expect or different than what you want your teacher demographics to look like, then that could be an indication that your teacher pay structure is not supporting your strategic goals for hiring highly qualified staff. This looks like it represents what you're trying to achieve right now. I don't see that the canary is, I don't hear the canary is chirping right now to continue that work. But this is something you definitely want to keep an eye on so that all of a sudden there are local districts where 75% of their teachers have 10 or fewer years of experience. And they don't intend that to be. That's what is in place, probably in virtue of pay challenges and other challenges. Does that answer your question?
It did. Yeah, I was asking if there's something that we should particularly be worried about, but I guess it sounds like you're saying it's based on what we decide we want to see.
Exactly. What is your strategic goal as a district? Some districts say we really want to be most competitive between years 5 and 15, and that's our target zone to find teachers with that kind of experience. I think that has become a luxury for a lot of districts. Right now, I think we're saying we want a certified teacher who passes background checks and can start tomorrow. I think, if you're trying to focus on strategy, though, being competitive in your teacher pay structure, where you want to reward your current teachers and be able to hire experienced teachers, as long as this aligns with your strategy, then you're good.
I know you maybe did ask this, but outside of compensation, if we say that 1 out of every 4 teachers is in their first couple of years and 1 out of every 10 is brand new to the profession, I think the question for us as campus leaders and district leaders is, what does that mean for us in terms of expectations, accountability, and autonomy? especially, and the level of support and resources you provide in the curriculum side. Thank you.
So I'm going to point out that this is 22-23 because I wanted to show you last year's comparison and this year's comparison to see how things have changed. So last year, you were between 98 and 100% of market. So even with, we're up to 2% below market. And the dollar differences below market were only $50 at the start, which keep in mind that's an annual salary. So $50 spread across 12 months is very tiny. And at the largest differential, you were $1,300 below. So just over $100 a month difference. That's not really that much. But note, okay, here's last year and here we are this year. There's a bigger gap between those years. Visually, it might not be as clear, but let's look at the actual numbers. Jump straight to the bottom, setting aside average salary, looking at 0, 5, 10, 15, and 20. Your smallest differential is $650 below market. Your largest differential is nearly $1,400 below market as starting salary. That tells me that your neighbors gave bigger teacher pay increases this year than you did. Two of your neighbors had 2 teacher pay increases this year because they had bigger contingent, pay increases. So they ended up getting 5-6% pay increases, which is double what a normal typical year would look like. So the next to bottom line is your percent difference from market. It's 1 to 2% across the survey points in the range. Where you're doing well is the average salary. I think that's in part to just having an experienced teaching population. And so, you know, as you, when we're looking at the average salary compared to your neighbor's average salaries, your average salaries are just a hair higher. So these are, I got asked that question yesterday too. That's possible because each of these points in the range says one 20-year teacher, I as a 20-year teacher am going to make $1,300 less than what I might make in your median district. But if you have more 20-year teachers than your neighboring districts, their average salary is going to look more like a 5 or 10-year teacher. So yeah, I realize it's counterintuitive when you look at the other numbers that are all negative. So yeah, this is clearly not harming your ability to hire experienced teachers now, but the cautionary tale would be you don't want to get too far behind because these differences are a typical annual pay increase for a teacher in 1 year. So not only are your neighbors going to give potentially $1,400, but then you've got to catch up to that. And so that ends up, if you get too far behind, it can be very costly and difficult to catch up. Teaching stipends, we're not looking at other stipends, extracurricular stipends, but when we're looking at teaching assignment stipends, I'll say you're competitive for the top 2, and bilingual is an important one to be competitive for, because as you mentioned earlier, they are just very difficult teachers to find, and so you don't want to pay any less than your neighbors do for that assignment additive. Special ed, though, is an area where you do pay less than your neighbors do. And this year in Central Texas, you've got at least one neighbor that has increased their stipends to $7,500 for the high needs special ed. And there's another one who I presented to a couple weeks ago who's proposing $8,000 for theirs. And they're the second highest payer in the area. So no telling whether they will or will not, but know that that's talk on the street. So you'll see later on that we're proposing an adjustment to your high needs special ed stipend. Of course, it would be great to adjust them all, and I guess there are some to the other special ed stipend too, but the list is on that. But you're not going to get to 7,000 or 8,000, but an increase will definitely help retain the staff that you have and help recruit new special ed teachers too. There's a lot of numbers on here, so just to talk you through the structure real quick. Your left-hand column is the grouping of jobs by the type of work that they're doing. The next column is employee pay to market. So that's your average pay compared to the median average market pay. The next column is midpoint to market. So those are two different measures. We want to measure both how your people compare to market value, but also how your structures compare to market value. That first one is let's call it a retention measure. If you're paying competitively, your people will stay. The second is a recruitment measure. If your structures are strong and competitive, you'll be able to fill vacancies more easily when they arrive. And then pay grade minimum to market is another structural measurement, but we look at those in particular for your non-exempt or hourly staff because starting pay is so much more important for those folks. Many come to you with no prior experience, so they're starting at that minimum more often. And then the last column is the number of jobs factored into each of those comparisons. So central administration, when compared to your local market, are 4% below market on average. Keep in mind, these are single incumbent positions almost exclusively, so it's 1% compared to the market. The average market, median average market value of all these one individual folks in neighboring districts. So that can be impacted by individual experience, skills, credentials, and such, but your structures are competitive to market. Similarly for campus admin, 2% below, which tracks with the teacher pay difference, and so you've aligned there at least, but the structures are competitive. Same is true for professional jobs below the administrator level. When we get to the hourly staff, you get a little more competitive, although I think that landscape is going to change because many of your peers have shifted and will shift to starting pay rates next year at $17 an hour and higher. And so right now, you're 99, 103, and 100% of market. So just about even or a hair above that on average. And your structure midpoints are strong, but your starting salaries need to come up a little bit to keep up with the neighbors. Questions about all that? That's a lot of numbers. I think the big takeaway is you're doing all right, but we want to be sure that we can keep you up with the changes that your neighboring districts are planning. Okay.
Wait, before we move into the recommendations, you said something about collecting data of other non-teaching.
Yes, so, sorry, I wasn't clear on the beginning.
Yeah,
So we
that's
did
not
a
in
salary survey of all of the districts in the state and have this will be our 40th anniversary of HR services this year. And we started it maybe 2 years after that, so we'll call it 38 years of surveys. And we collect data for about 150 non-teacher jobs, in addition to all the teacher data. So all of these figures are summarizing your market comparisons for all of our
So
survey
these are not
data.
just school district professionals and office and technical.
So this is all of the number of benchmarks and the number of school district jobs that we've made a market match for. And the comparisons will be, for campus administration, that is only school district data that we've collected and compared. Central administration is only school district data, but for the others, it's going to be a mix. So there may be some jobs that only have non-school because we don't survey for it, but we have data from the sources we purchase. For many of them, it's going to be combined. Thank you for clarifying, Leslie. Right at the back. Okay, we're ready for some recommendations. The first is to, remember I talked about individual pay and structures. The first is to recommend some adjustments to the structures to align with market. Because so many of your neighbors are increasing their starting pay rates, you want to increase your starting ranges to help keep up with them. And so that would be a $16 an hour starting pay rate for all of your non-exempt staff. It's not quite the 17 that some of your neighbors have gotten to, but this is a huge improvement, 50 cents an hour improvement from where you're at, and it represents a cost, of course, to the district. And so I think this is something that y'all as a leadership group could be very proud of accomplishing for your staff. It would get you market competitive midpoints, and all around this would be a strong movement to better align with your districts. The second is general pay increases, or GPI for short. Those would help you improve market position and keep up with what your neighbors are doing. The recommendation is that each continuing teacher would receive $2,550 as an annual increase for next year. That's an average pay increase of 4.38% for teachers. And that's calculated as a percent of market median teacher salary. And so that's important to note because the others are calculated as a percent of midpoint. There is no midpoint for pay structure because there's a salary for each year. And so while we generate the midpoint for other pay grades based on market value, we have one market value for teachers, so it's easier just to use that one market value. And for all other non-teacher groups, it's a minimum of 2% general pay increase calculated on their midpoint. But because the structures are shifting significantly, we're trying to spread pay within the ranges to make sure we don't create pay compression where people are piled up near the minimum of the structure. Imagine it as we've raised the floor of pay, now we have to raise the ceiling and spread people out. Among it, that generates adjustments for staff so that average pay increases are significantly higher than the 2%, averaging between 5 and 5.7% for your hourly staff. Kind of tease the adjustments there. We want to make sure everyone makes at least 1% above their minimum pay range. We want to make, we need to make one teacher pay structure adjustment just to make sure there's enough salary space between years of experience. For anyone who's moved up that educator career pathway and is no longer a teacher, but is further along that pathway, we want to make sure that they make slightly more than they would make as a teacher. In other words, we don't want to create a disincentive for gaining leadership roles. Placement scale adjustments, as I mentioned, for the hourly staff, it just spreads pay out by years of experience. And then the district is working to standardize some duty hours of child nutrition staff, and so we calculated the cost for those adjustments. And then finally, in the way of recommendations, the special ed stipend increases. Resource inclusion would move to 2,000, and then the rest are captured there as well. And you'll see the cost in just a moment. So the left column here is the name of your pay groups. The next column is the cost of the general pay increase. Keep in mind again, it's 4.3% average for the teacher group and then 2% average for the others. And so that averages out to just over 3% budget impact. The adjustments represent almost another % increase. And so the total cost impact would be 4.2%. I could say for your neighbor districts, most of them are talking about 1, 2, and talking about unlikely to adopt to 3%. So 4% pay increase would be higher than many of your neighbors are talking about, which is great to do it.
Can you help me understand again really quickly the difference between general pay increase and the adjustments?
Yes, absolutely. Think of the general pay increase as the across the board part. So everyone gets that piece. The adjustments are necessary for staff to align them with their years of experience, to make sure they're paid above minimum, to
That's
make
the
sure
key,
that...
to avoid the bunching in the middle.
Exactly, yeah, you got it. Yeah, and you'll note that for some of these job groups, the adjustments are more, for your hourly staff, the adjustments are more than the general pay increase. Because the ranges, the structures themselves have increased by more than 3%, and so this helps get them.
Is it accurate to say that if we are taking, let's say, instructional aides and we're changing what minimum, midpoint, and max are, that calculates as an adjustment, not a general pay increase?
Correct, it would be both. So we're going to start with the general pay increase, and every instructional assistant would get the 2% of midpoint. But then, once that structure moves, if we need to give them more adjustment to align, to spread them out, which nearly all of them, I think a huge percentage are getting, that's that middle column.
Got it, thank you.
Sure.
So does this cost model not incorporate recommendation 4? So it says minus targeted incentive pay savings.
So, yeah, so that's a good point. So right now, and I might have to defer to your experts here, but right now you've got a targeted incentive pay plan that, as I understand it, is not necessarily sustainable as an ongoing cost to the district. And so the idea was to be able to pay for the stipend increases that have been recommended that would serve your strategic goals of being able to fill those teaching and retain those teachers. that you can pay for that in part using the targeted pay.
Yeah, we're actually going to show that here on one of the next slides. Since we have about 15 minutes left, so we're going to kind of hustle through that.
Yes. This is the cost difference.
I think that was, you were talking about the slide, the recommendation for, is that?
Right.
So that shows what these stipends would be. However, this is not an incremental increase because we did do some targeted incentive stipends for some of our special education teachers this year.
So we had the regular stipend for the position, but we also had targeted incentive stipends. And what we're doing is we're marrying the two into one. So it's not necessarily an increase in stipends, but we're building it into our budget, so it's calculated for.
Yes, so they will receive it each year.
Yeah, it doesn't depend on the district decided, it's standardized.
Right.
And I think, those caution here is the difference between what I've recommended over and above the funding that currently exists.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Thank you. And Jennifer is going to continue on with the chapter 2 of this conversation, which is the budget.
So we have the money for it.
Right, and we'll do it quickly. So just wanted to talk about what has changed. This is our fourth budget workshop last month. We looked at these figures, and then since then, we have received the TASB compensation study that Amy's gone over, so we've incorporated that now with her recommendations. We've also gotten more information on the staffing needs and our enrollment needs for teachers for our new 3 campuses and for the growth in enrollment. So we've also incorporated those. We continue to look at expenditures to reduce those based on the third-party TASB staffing study that we received, and also retirements and resignations. So we're looking at those, like the attrition. We're using those to help reduce our expenditures. And then we will be receiving our preliminary estimate of property values, which helps us with our tax collections and our state aid calculation. We actually got an estimate early this morning, but we haven't read through the budget template yet. Okay, so that's what's changed since we met last. And then what I'd like to do is just draw your attention to the middle column, the third column from the left, which is the 24-25 preliminary budget projections based on those additional information items that we have received this month. If you go down to the excess deficit of revenues over expenditures, we are now looking at a $1.7 million deficit with those incorporated expenditures and reductions and efficiencies. When we looked at this last, we were at $2.2 million deficit, so we have achieved some more efficiencies since then. And if you look to the right, on the right-hand column, I just wanted to point out some of the major items that we've been working on through our staffing study and through attrition. We have reduced central office and support positions by 1 million. By increasing our high school and our middle school class size staffing formulas, we have reduced 1.7 million. We have gone through the department non-payroll allocations, and those have been reduced by 657,000, and we continue to look at some reductions there. Travel stipends for executive directors and above, we've reduced by 14,700. And then we are continuing to reduce food purchases, travel, and overtime. Those have not been reflected yet in budget. However, we're working on those areas.
The last 3 haven't been reflected in the budget.
Correct, just the last 3. We don't have a dollar amount attached to those yet.
And would you also say that 1.7, just like every time we've done a board workshop, we're seeking to drop that number, that we're continuing
We
to?
are, yes. That is the work that we are continuing to do.
But last time we talked, that deficit was 2.2, and then you kind of line And the difference between 2.2 and 1.8 is very different than the total of those cost savings on the right side.
Right, we already had some savings. We've been working since January on those savings, so those were reflected. This is where we're sitting now.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
from January to
So it's
March.
not like we had a 2.2 deficit and then you subtracted 3.5 million and now we're at 1.8.
Right. We didn't have the dollars attached last meeting, and I felt like it was important to go ahead and share that. But those dollars continue to change as we continue to work.
Does this incorporate that, the salary thing we
It does.
just talked about?
It does.
So this has that extra $4 million already in that?
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
That's correct. And also in here, there's a little bit of padding built into this projected budget for if, like, let's say, enrollment at Tippett Middle School ends up higher than expected, just some reserve positions for approval late in the summer, early August are held in there for the just in case.
At the last workshop, we asked for some history on projected versus what actually took place, and I got that, and I want to thank you, Devin, and thank you, Jennifer, for that. It was insightful information. I appreciate you remembering and following up.
Okay, so we always look at where we are and where we're going. We are at our fourth budget workshop in April at the board meeting. We will have an updated budget. May not have changed much from what you're seeing today, but we are also going to be approving compensation at that meeting. And then in May, we'll again show an updated projection, and at that time, we will have a very tight number on the property tax values. And then in June is when we bring the final budget to the board for approval. For the general fund, the interest and savings fund, and the child nutrition fund.
I just want to say this out loud, that we go into these conversations never assuming on April 2nd that everything that we're looking at is absolutely final, hard and exact. We're going to continue to work through budget, have our financial advisor look through these numbers, ask for a second opinion from an outside consultant, and just absolutely make sure that everything we're talking about is sustainable long-term.
Can you show me the revised versus current on that slide?
Yes, that's the other, yes, we've been working on that as well.
Is that drifting the wrong way? I was trying to pull up the old one. Seems like we were dialing it in, but it seems like it's bouncing.
No, I think it's a little better. It's at 2.2, so a slight
So,
change.
okay.
We have one more month of actuals, so we were able to adjust it for that.
And then the ADA number on there is not the same attendance number as the weekly number you said? That's more question for you.
Yeah, so the ADA number on there, Jennifer's conservatively estimating that once you subtract out pre-K, our enrollment is 13,743. And so the thing that's not factored in here is something we absolutely need to focus on, which is increasing average daily attendance. But we don't want to build in here an optimistic picture of what our efforts will reap. We just want that to be a pleasant surprise next year.
Right, I get that on the projections forward. I'm talking about current year, we have the 91% on there.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's that very first column is the revised budget, so that's what we budgeted. And then that next column is where we're actually sitting. So when we built the,
Okay. None of it matches the weekly numbers we see. Right?
Yeah.
right, so it's adjusted for
For
pre-K,
pre-K, that's the big.
because we only get half, even though we offer a full day of pre-K, we only get half funding for that.
Yeah.
So that skews our attendance percent,
Down,
Yeah. but it's what we actually get funded on versus those students are there, they are in attendance, but we're only getting half credit for that.
Covered a lot of ground today, Trustee.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Very informational.
Very good, very informative. Thank you so much